For 40 years, we thought Miyagi was just a character, but Pat Morita was hiding a secret warning in the original script that everyone missed. Before he passed, he left a message for Ralph Macchio that didn't just predict the future of Cobra Kai. It revealed a dark truth about the Karate Kid legacy that is only coming to light today. When you sit down to watch the latest season of the hit streaming series or look forward to the upcoming theatrical release of Karate Kid Legends, you are participating in a massive cultural phenomenon. You are watching a story about underdogs, fierce rivalries, and the pursuit of ultimate victory against insurmountable odds. But beneath the surface of the iconic crane kicks, the ruthless sweep-the-leg commands, and the endless dojo turf wars, there is a haunting reality. We have completely misunderstood the fundamental architecture of the 1984 cinematic masterpiece. What we consumed as a triumphant sports drama was actually a desperate, deeply personal transmission from an actor who had survived unspeakable horrors. Pat Morita was not simply playing a wise martial arts master from Okinawa. He was projecting his own agonizing survival story onto the silver screen, using the guise of a Hollywood blockbuster to deliver a profound cautionary tale about the devastating cost of conflict, a warning that the franchise itself would eventually ignore as it transformed into a perpetual engine of intergenerational violence. To truly understand the immense gravity of this hidden message, we have to peel back the comfortable layers of pop culture nostalgia and confront the raw, unvarnished history of the man who brought the iconic sensei to life. Right now, millions of fans are captivated by the ongoing saga in the San Fernando Valley, eagerly digesting every sudden twist and turn of the reignited, decades-old feud between Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence. We celebrate the return of classic, ruthless villains, and we cheer from the edge of our seats for the high-stakes tournament battles. Yet, this endless cycle of retaliation, shifting alliances, and vengeance is the precise outcome Pat Morita secretly feared most. The original script for the first film was meant to be a closed loop, a definitive, unshakable statement that fighting is a catastrophic failure of communication, not a glamorous path to glory. Morita injected a profound, weary melancholy into his performance, a heavy, unspoken sadness that grounded the teenage suburban drama in a brutal, grounded reality. He understood something fundamental about the fragile human condition that the studio producers and even the director initially overlooked. The concept of balance, which has since been commodified into countless t-shirt slogans and shallow motivational posters, was not an abstract philosophical concept for the struggling actor. It was the absolute, razor-thin difference between life and death. The chilling warning he embedded into his specific line deliveries, his subtle physical gestures, and his hard-fought improvised moments on set was a frantic plea. He desperately wanted the audience to recognize that the glorification of combat inevitably destroys the soul of the victor, just as surely as it breaks the physical body of the defeated. You see, the physical vulnerability of Miyagi was born from a very real, agonizing childhood trauma that violently shaped every waking moment of Pat Morita's existence. Long before he ever stepped onto a bright Hollywood soundstage or rubbed his hands together to magically heal a wounded teenage knee, he was a helpless prisoner trapped in his own failing flesh. At the incredibly tender age of 2, he was diagnosed with spinal tuberculosis, a horrific and fiercely debilitating disease that aggressively attacks and degrades the bones of the spine. While other young children were outside learning to run, jump, and scrape their knees, he was forcefully strapped down in a rigid, claustrophobic full-body cast. He spent nearly 9 agonizing, lonely years confined to stark charity hospitals and sanitariums in Northern California, entirely immobilized, staring blankly at the ceiling, waiting to die. The medical experts bluntly told his devastated parents that he would absolutely never walk. He was a fragile, profoundly broken boy who learned earlier than anyone ever should that the human body is incredibly susceptible to total destruction. When he miraculously recovered after undergoing a massive, highly experimental spinal fusion surgery, he did not emerge with a fiery desire to conquer or physically dominate others. Instead, he possessed an almost holy, terrified reverence for the simple miracle of movement. So when you watch the film and see his character adamantly refusing to strike first, passionately teaching that martial arts is exclusively for self-defense, you are not simply hearing a clever screenwriter's fictional dialogue. You are listening to the desperate echoes of a child who spent 9 years completely paralyzed in a hospital bed. Morita actively shaped the progression of the script to emphasize the terrifying fragility of the human body. He warned us through his cautious movements that the brutal strikes and sweeps celebrated under the bright lights of the All-Valley Tournament were not acts of heroism, but acts of profound ignorance committed by reckless teenagers who had no idea how easily a human spine can be permanently shattered. He transformed what could have easily been a generic, one-dimensional action mentor role into a chilling reflection on human frailty, secretly begging the audience to understand that physical power is a temporary illusion, and that seeking to inflict pain on another person is a grotesque violation of the delicate miracle of health. This was his first major hidden warning, presenting a stark, sobering contrast to the modern glorification of endless teenage brawling we see dominating global streaming platforms today. But the severe physical trauma was merely the prologue to a much darker, systemic psychological agony, one that would firmly cement the core warning hidden in the emotional center of the franchise. Imagine surviving a paralyzing, life-threatening childhood disease, finally taking your very first miraculous, unaided steps at age 11, only to be immediately escorted by armed military personnel onto a dusty train bound for a desolate, unforgiving prison camp. This is exactly the nightmare that happened to Pat Morita. Directly from the sterile safety of the hospital, operating under the dark shadow of World War II and the absolute cruelty of Executive Order 9066, he and his entire family were stripped of their constitutional rights, their human dignity, and their freedom, entirely because of their Japanese heritage. They were incarcerated behind sharp barbed wire in the Gila River internment camp in the blistering heat of Arizona, and later transferred to the heavily guarded Tule Lake Segregation Center in Northern California. For years of his adolescence, he lived under the constant, terrifying threat of armed guards, surviving in brutal, freezing winter conditions, while the very country he called home actively treated him as an enemy combatant. This unimaginable, sweeping systemic betrayal is the invisible, heavy anchor holding down the most emotionally devastating scene in modern cinematic history. When you watch the famous, heartbreaking scene where Miyagi gets heavily intoxicated, puts on his pristine old army uniform, and weeps uncontrollably while clutching the Medal of Honor, you are witnessing an actor actively channeling raw, unfiltered, personal trauma. Morita famously fought tooth and nail against the studio executives who desperately wanted to cut that specific scene from the final edit because they wrongly thought it slowed down the upbeat pacing of a summer karate movie. But he knew it was the absolute, undeniable linchpin of his secret warning. He urgently needed the global audience to see the grotesque, crushing hypocrisy of war, nationalism, and tribalism. The character had fought valiantly, spilling blood for an American government that had simultaneously locked up his pregnant wife in an internment camp, directly leading to her tragic death. Through this agonizing on-screen revelation, Morita was explicitly warning us about the intoxicating, toxic allure of taking a side, of blindly joining a dojo, of proudly wearing a uniform, and of purposefully blinding oneself to the underlying humanity of the perceived enemy. He was heavily signaling that the ideological, ruthless warfare represented by the Cobra Kai snake was not just a clever metaphor for high school bullying, but a highly dangerous, scaled-down microcosm of the exact same dehumanizing tribalism that allows governments to build concentration camps. His cinematic warning was crystal clear. The exact moment you pledge absolute, unquestioning allegiance to a fist, a flag, or a dojo at the expense of your own independent empathy, you have already completely lost your soul. This harsh reality brings us to the agonizing final chapters of his remarkable life, and the tragic, unheeded prophecy he left behind for Ralph Macchio and the wealthy custodians of the expanding cinematic universe. Despite achieving massive, unprecedented global fame, earning a highly coveted Academy Award nomination, and becoming a universally beloved cultural icon, the deep darkness of his past never truly let him go. Hollywood is a notoriously ruthless industry that absolutely loves to consume its heroes, and he quickly found himself endlessly, frustratingly typecast, trapped in a shallow caricature of his own brilliant creation, continuously asked to repeat the same broken English catchphrases for decades in subpar sequels and television spots. The profound, life-altering philosophical message he desperately tried to impart was swallowed whole by an aggressive, relentless commercial machine that only truly cared about moving merchandise, selling headbands, and promoting action figures. The devastating, heartbreaking irony is that the brilliant man who preached ultimate inner peace and absolute sobriety of the mind succumbed to severe, crippling alcoholism and crushing, silent depression later in his life. He watched in real time, powerless, as the entire world completely missed the deeper, life-saving meaning of his nuanced performance. Before his untimely passing in 2005, his private, earnest conversations with his young co-star carried a heavy, sobering weight of realization. He clearly saw the inevitable trajectory of the entertainment industry, specifically how it endlessly regurgitates and resurrects past conflicts for new, massive profits. The message he conveyed was a desperate, urgent caution against being permanently anchored to the ghosts of the past. He warned that the ultimate, inescapable trap is allowing your entire identity to be entirely defined by a bitter battle you fought when you were just a volatile teenager. The real, undeniable tragedy of the sprawling franchise, the dark truth actively coming to light right now in high definition, is that the modern expansion of this universe has completely, systematically actualized his absolute worst fears. The ongoing franchise has seamlessly become an inescapable, massive gravity well of endless retaliation, completely abandoning the ultimate, noble goal of true conflict resolution. We currently have characters in their late 50s still actively, obsessively orchestrating their entire adult lives around a localized high school karate tournament, eagerly passing their deeply inherited, massively unresolved psychological damage down to a whole new, impressionable generation of teenagers. In Morita's secret, desperately hidden warning was about the urgent, life-saving need to simply walk away, to permanently drop the weapon, and to bravely break the generational cycle of violence entirely. You can clearly and undeniably see the terrifying manifestation of this ignored prophecy when you critically analyze the complex narrative structure of the current hit television series. Look incredibly closely at the destructive trajectory of Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso. For all their temporary, fragile truces and fleeting moments of shared bonding over drinks, they are pathologically, fundamentally incapable of escaping the suffocating walls of the dojo. They continuously, expertly justify escalating neighborhood violence, massive property damage, and the severe emotional manipulation of vulnerable minors entirely under the righteous guise of teaching vital self-defense. The show, while brilliantly entertaining and emotionally gripping, operates by fundamentally and aggressively contradicting the core, peaceful thesis of the original Mentor. Every single time a major character genuinely tries to find lasting peace, the overarching narrative violently forces them back into a gi, demanding fresh blood and broken bones strictly for the sake of modern audience retention and algorithmic engagement. And as we look closely toward the cinematic horizon at the upcoming massive release of Karate Kid, Legends, where two incredibly massive cinematic universes are set to violently and spectacularly collide, fully integrating Jackie Chan's Emmer, Hand with the classic legacy characters, we are witnessing the final, absolute commodification of the exact trauma Pat Morita vehemently warned us about. The global, multi-million-dollar stage is being carefully set for an even grander, more destructive spectacle of combat, proving undeniably that the massive entertainment machine will always, without fail, prioritize the visceral, adrenaline-fueled thrill of a punch over the quiet, highly unmarketable reality of true, lasting inner peace. The enduring legacy of the beloved films is no longer about bravely overcoming bullying. It is fundamentally about establishing a highly profitable forever war. Pat Morita intimately understood the terrifying, consuming nature of forever wars because he actually lived through them, suffering silently in rigid hospital beds and trapped behind freezing barbed wire fences. His legendary performance was an act of profound, unseen subversion, a brilliant Trojan horse delivering a vital, desperate anti-violence manifesto cleverly disguised as a breezy summer blockbuster. We may have happily spent the last 4 decades standing up and cheering for the triumphant crane kick, but we completely, willfully ignored the silent tears of the broken man who stood unsteadily on the wooden post, desperately begging us to realize that the only true, lasting victory in this life is never having to fight at all. He carefully left us a profound, beautifully constructed roadmap for spiritual survival that we eagerly traded in for the endless, cheap adrenaline of nostalgia. But this entire, destructive generational cycle of trauma doesn't just begin and end with the journey of the hero. In fact, if you truly want to understand the devastating, underlying psychological manipulation at the dark heart of this infamous valley, you urgently need to look at the other, much darker side of the map. The hidden, complex tragedy of the villain's tortured path reveals an even darker, more sinister secret about exactly how society actively grooms its monsters, a chilling reality that completely, fundamentally rewrites the history of the original antagonist and everything you thought you knew about the nature of evil.